My name is Bobby Tulis. I'm the Group Marketing Director for Global Freight Solutions. If you don't know Global Freight Solutions, first of all, I'd be surprised. But for those of you that are not familiar with us, we are the e-commerce industry's largest provider of global multi-carrier parcel services. So wherever you've got your parcels to be shipped, we'll make sure that they're going to get there and also get them back if they're returned. Anyway, this stream is all about how to maximize your sales on marketplaces. And I think the next session with Nautical, that I'm very proud to be the co-host for, is going to be really relevant and interesting. How to succeed as a marketplace, lessons from a marketplace expert. So welcome, Ryan. Ryan Lee is the founder and CEO of Nautical Commerce. And Ryan, everybody has to sell on marketplaces, okay? And I say that because we've seen the explosion of marketplaces. So not just the leaders, the Amazons, the eBays, the various marketplaces that are the real big players, but also there's been a proliferation of marketplaces that have come up over the past couple of years. And I think even if you've come from the perspective of being a traditional brand, that has started, say, with bricks and mortar, then you go on to selling on your website. Even in those circumstances where there's been some resistance of brands to say, I'm not going on a marketplace because it's not the place for my brand, it's almost like you can't ignore marketplaces. They have to be part of your omni-channel strategy and vital to growth. And in 2020, we saw them grow over 80% in revenue, which is absolutely phenomenal, but not surprising given that we were all, stuck indoors and having to buy online. But marketplaces would be the first place you'd go, really, for convenience. So we know the power of marketplaces, and many of the people watching this today are selling. In fact, everybody's probably selling on marketplaces. But how do you add the marketplace model into your existing business? So include it as part of your model. Or launch your own marketplace instead of just participating in them. Nautical Commerce is a marketplace platform which allows retailers, brands, and B2B businesses to quickly launch and scale marketplaces without the cost of custom software, which sounds amazing because you don't have that upfront huge capital investment. And I guess your speed to market is going to be so much faster too. So it's potentially low risk, which sounds, would be music to people's ears. So Ryan, you're here with us today. Okay. You're going to be sharing some of the marketplaces, successes, and challenges that you've seen. You are one of the leading fintech and commerce experts in the world. So we're really privileged to have you here today. You've worked with Visa, with Apple Pay, 16 different countries around the world. I feel very inadequate being in front of you, Ryan, I have to say. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to you.
Well, thank you, Bobby. I appreciate the very flattering introduction. I want to touch on a couple things you mentioned. It's now a strategic imperative, really, to participate in marketplaces. In what I'd call yesteryear, we leveraged advertising channels like Google and Facebook and a couple other venues to drum up interest and get awareness and eyeballs on our products, as brands. Nowadays, that shifted to marketplaces. Marketplaces really are now an advertising channel. It's a channel for brands and sellers to get their products in the hands of consumers. And so I agree with you that right now now is the time for marketplaces. One thing I want to walk through specifically is what a marketplace is and what it isn't. A lot of folks, when they think marketplace, especially organizations that decide to embark on the journey of building their own, what they do is they immediately think marketplace is an e-commerce store. It's an evolution of an e-commerce store. To an extent, there's some truth to that, but it really is three systems. It's much different, which adds a significant layer of complexity. What we like to say, here at Nautical is marketplace really operate at the intersection of commerce, fintech, and logistics. And I know, Bobby, you come from logistics. One of the key things that a lot of these marketplaces have done is they've effectively productized what I call the invisible. If you think about Amazon, they've conditioned all of us as consumers to know that we can get something in 2 days, without question and generally without exception. That's selling the invisible. They haven't focused much on the front end. Their storefront is really listings. Where they put a lot of emphasis is in that fintech and logistics part. And what I'd love to ask, Bobby, being from the logistics world, how important is it to lean into logistics and really operationalize that as a marketplace?
Well, it's vital from two aspects, really. Well, first of all, it depends how you fulfill and dispatch and deliver your purchase, the orders once customers bought something on the marketplace, whether if it's FBA on Amazon, then of course, then that logistics side would be handled by the marketplace. But regardless of whether you're doing it yourself or if a third party is doing it for you, a marketplace is doing it for you, the logistics side is vital because you can live or die by customer reviews on a marketplace. That's something that we see, and something that we see as consumers ourselves. Before you buy something, you're going to look at what other people are saying about it, check the reviews to give you that feeling of trust or confidence. And one of the most common areas of complaint is around the logistics side, delivery, packages arriving damaged or whatever. But the delivery, you can make the sale. The delivery side can make or break the sale, because if it doesn't arrive on time, you've got an unhappy customer. And also, like I said, brands can live or die by reviews. And also, these are KPIs and SLAs which merchants on marketplaces have got to commit to, and there are potentially penalties if they don't, perform to those levels.
Absolutely. Marketplace sells trust, and to your point there, that trust is that, they've effectively brought the sellers to the table. They're bringing the buyers and they're matching them up. At the end of the day, logistics is a key component of that. And, when you're operating a marketplace, you're not generally responsible for that logistics. Your job is really facilitation. Your job is orchestrating, that order through not only, your fintech engine, but ultimately pushing it out to the sellers and their logistics providers. And to that point, it really is about managing that service level so that you deliver that exceptional customer experience. It's interesting that we look at it from this prism, right? Because a lot of organizations, when they think about marketplace, they strictly focus on commerce. And, this next slide really kind of goes into why that's fundamentally different. As a marketplace, what you're doing is you're not only removing the friction to buy, which a traditional e-commerce store has to do, but you also have to remove the friction to sell. And what does that mean, right? If you want to attract, marquee sellers, suppliers, vendors, or even developers, if you run an app store, you want to make it as easy as possible to not only onboard, but also to be able to list your product, to syndicate your catalog, if you're connecting in an ERP or another commerce solution, so that, sellers can get their, products and services on the marketplace as efficiently as possible. And if you want them to, really hit those SLAs and achieve, what we're all really aiming for is that, buyer experience, that's going to, create return customers. You've got to make sure that you're able to push those orders back into their system of record. And as a marketplace, the other thing you've got to do is, and this is really that fintech component, you've got to be able to calculate, not only the settlement of the actual payment, but you've got to calculate the commission. You've got to be able to execute the payout as well. And this is where it's significantly different than traditional commerce. And lastly, it's kind of funny. We like to say marketplace operate in an inventory light world. Is they generally don't hold the inventory. So to your point, Bobby, they don't control the logistics. Ultimately the sellers control that. Now it's their responsibility, obviously, to make the customer whole, because in most cases they're the merchant of record. But at the end of the day, their job is really ensuring that the sellers have everything they need from a communication perspective to get that order shipped and get it to the customer as quickly as possible. One of the key questions we get when organizations decide to go down the path of a marketplace is this build versus buy, question. And it's interesting. The argument that we hear is that the marketplace is so unique, or the use case is so unique that they're almost forced to build it. Fundamentally, as an organization, you've got to focus on what you do best, your core product. It's funny because most marketplaces are not tech companies. Some have become tech companies out of necessity because that was their origin. That's kind of what they did. They built a tech infrastructure. Look at Amazon, right? They built this very massive platform. There was a lot of iterations, and they ultimately productized their backend, which was AWS, and offered that to the world. But the idea that you would spend time, building something versus, taking something off the shelf and really leaning into what you do best is ultimately why a lot of organizations fail when they attempt to build their own marketplace. Part of that is this total cost of ownership, perspective, right? Not only do you have the technology costs, but really the marketplace is effectively like a mall, right? It's almost like real estate. You're renting real estate to sellers and developers and operators and folks that are going to participate in the marketplace ecosystem, so that you can effectively sell a product that sets you apart from the competition as a marketplace, or in the commerce world, right? Not only do you have the technology costs, but you also have the personnel costs, right? The labor inefficiency and operating costs, around operating the marketplace. And then again, the friction costs. These could be, the checkout's not efficient. The logistics don't happen the way a customer expects, or on the time they expect it. And then lastly is really this time to market. Bobby, you mentioned something that's very interesting. Is a lot of organizations that embark on this journey to build their marketplace really end up, going way past, the deadline that they kind of set for launching the marketplace. And part of
no
that
doubt
really,
budget as well, right? It gets
exactly.
scope creep.
Exactly. And part of this is the unknown unknowns, that organizations run into when they start to build a marketplace. Remember, a marketplace really is three systems. And that's why we like to say it really is at the intersection of commerce, fintech, and logistics. When you go out and build your marketplace, you're not just building a commerce platform, right? You've got to layer in the fintech component. And that includes a variety of complexity, right? You've got taxes, you've got payouts, you've got payment orchestration if you're doing international work, and ultimately you're going to want to get into cost arbitrage with payment with payment providers, and then let alone logistics, right? Trying to ensure that you can orchestrate it and syndicate it across all of your different sellers, contract management, settlement, payout. And so, what we tell folks is, the buy versus build question comes down to this question, right? Is if your marketplace fundamentally as a transaction is different than the rest of the marketplaces out there, then it probably does make sense to build it, because it falls outside of what I call the norm. However, if you look at Amazon, you look at Uber, you look at Airbnb, if you look at these, or even Convoy, a freight marketplace, these organizations look, ostensibly different. However, the transactions, are fundamentally the same. The workflow is fundamentally the same. You've got to onboard, in the Convoy case, carriers, which are their suppliers. In the Amazon case, it's sellers. In the Uber case, it's drivers, right? And this is really curating that supplier network or your sellers, your vendors. You've got to be able to list the services. In Uber's case, you got to be able to supply drivers, drivers that are available. In Amazon's, it's the products and the inventory that's available. In Convoy, it's the carriers that are available for a specific route. At the end of the day, a buyer or the end customer needs to be able to secure a transaction, locking up that asset, whether it's a driver, whether it's a product, whether it's an app on an app store, or, in Convoy's situation, the shippers. And then lastly, you need to be able to settle transactions and then pay, the constituents that are on the actual marketplace, right? Your vendor. I mean, every one of these, Airbnb, Uber, Apple's App Store, Amazon, these are all fundamentally the same workflow for a transaction. And so, if your marketplace falls out of one of those workflows,
they'd have to be very niche, wouldn't they? It had to be a very niche market. But when I look at this slide, Ryan, I just think to myself, from a commercial perspective, you've got the balance between what's it going to cost me and how quickly can I get the revenue, time to revenue. But also there's the ongoing maintenance cost because technology evolves at such a pace. How do you keep that? How do you maintain that?
You're spot on, right? The interesting part that we found is when organizations go down this path, it's double-digit millions and at least 2 to 3 years to launch a marketplace. And so, if you think about the revenue component, if you can launch a marketplace, let's say same year, or even 90 days, right? 90 to 180 days, you've compressed your timeline to go to market and you get to learning much faster. And that's the key. In every endeavor, especially in business, is your goal is to get to learning as fast as possible with your end customer, with the core product that you're delivering. And anything that stops you from that is contributing to the potential failure.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's move on to the second lesson that we've learned, respect to marketplaces. One of the keys to being successful as a marketplace is enabling sellers and suppliers, or in app stores, developers, to be able to join your marketplace pretty seamlessly, be able to list and ultimately transact, right? And so what we say is meet the sellers where they are. Why? Because at the end of the day, a lot of these organizations have already digitized their environment, right? They've got their own stores, whether it's on Shopify or Magento or BigCommerce. And the idea that they want to participate in marketplaces is really an imperative for them at this point. It's really marketing. The challenge is, these systems really need to be able to syndicate that seller's catalog into the marketplace platform, or the marketplace needs to be able to push those back into the seller. The organizations that did this incredibly well have become super successful. If you really think about the organizations that really became marketplaces and embraced that model and made it super simple for sellers to join, are really organizations like Amazon, right? Apple and the developer network. If you think about, Target, who has a marketplace now, right? Best Buy. These organizations have made it super simple for organizations to join and get their catalog into the platform, right? What I call the marketplace native organizations, these are, the Airbnbs, the Ubers, the Instacarts, Turo for democratizing access to, rental cars for personal, personal owners. This was what they built into the system. So when you're leveraging a marketplace platform, whether it's homegrown or a platform you bought off the shelf, what you want to make sure is that platform enables your sellers. It's removed that friction to sell, because at the end of the day, that's what is going to draw in the buyers, right? Is your curated seller network. And again, it doesn't matter if you're the Convoys of the world where you're trying to curate carriers, or you're the Apples of the world where you're trying to bring on developers. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that that process is as seamless as possible. That doesn't mean that you skip things like validation and qualification for sellers. That's absolutely a critical component of the process. Marketplaces that have created curated experiences really are where where buyers like to go, is because it's different than what I call a catch-all store, and it does create that unique service proposition from a business model perspective. But fundamentally, it's the same. The transaction's the same, and the making sure that the seller can get the order, can fulfill the order, can deliver it, localize it, really is the key ingredient to a successful marketplace. I want to touch on one of the more salient points of marketplaces now, and it's very relevant now because there's been a bevy of legislative activity that's really been happening over the last year or two, right? Anybody who's been in marketplace really kind of paid attention to this sales tax nexus ruling out of South Dakota, with respect to Wayfair. This really changed the requirements, and marketplaces have traditionally operated in one locale and never really had let's just say domiciled residency in states, and this specifically is for the United States, but this applies also internationally. And so this bevy of legislative activity and pressure on marketplaces is really making it more difficult to not only operate but stay compliant. But it's very, very necessary. One of the more recent rulings as well, or at least legislative actions, was that marketplaces are now responsible for withholding seller income and ensuring that the sellers that participate are paying their due to the IRS and other governments across the world. On top of that, this sales tax nexus obviously made it much more challenging. Now, there's organizations like Avalara, FatLayers, TaxJar, which was acquired by Stripe, that help. But at the end of the day, it really is the marketplace's responsibility to do that. And last but not least, is the fintech component of a marketplace can't be underestimated. When you're doing commerce, there's no real necessity to do compliance checking and what we call know your customer, know your vendor on folks that are providing you inventory. Usually, you're buying inventory from some other supplier, you're holding the inventory, and then you're selling it. In a marketplace, you have the requirement of actually validating the sellers that are on your platform, because if you're pushing payments to them and they're a sanctioned entity or they're on a list, this can get you in some pretty big trouble, to the point to where the government's the different government agencies can more or less shut down your site because you're a vector for terrorist financing or counterfeiting and the like. And so operationalizing a compliance framework is absolutely critical in a marketplace. And so these are the unknown unknowns that organizations don't realize when they embark on this journey to become a marketplace. Is the build versus buy. Really, what we say is buy as much as possible, because trying to shoulder the burdens of all of this really can crush an organization, when in reality a marketplace should not be focused on these kinds of things. They should be focused on the product or service that they deliver to their buyers, because that's where you make the difference, right? And so let platforms do this for you. Let them do the compliance checking. Let them do the payouts. Let them do validation. Trying to become a tech company and a marketplace at the same time is a bit much to bite off. Not to mention, Bobby, in your case, a logistics company too.
But also in this case, becoming tax specialists too, because it's not just as the tax laws change all the time. We've seen so many changes, with Brexit and companies now having to, do VAT returns in each market, etc. If you are buying rather than building, then you don't have to worry about that ongoing compliance is already built in.
Absolutely. Well, and compliance also is, I would say compliance and security. So let's kind of insulate that. But, if you think about security, the overhead of being a tech company nowadays with, all of these organizations being compromised with takeovers and or, backdoors into their platforms, trying to maintain a payment stack in 10 different providers and making sure you're compliant with PSD2's secure or strong customer authentication and 3D Secure 2.0 and all of these other things that are necessary really can just stop an organization in their tracks. And so, this is one of the reasons why we really do lean into, make sure that you bring on strong partners, of course, that do that for you, but don't maintain that overhead yourself. It just doesn't make sense.
Can I ask a question, Ryan?
Yeah,
I'm done
asking questions. Go ahead.
So if you're going to bring a partner in to do this, does that mean that you're not only delegating the work to them, you're outsourcing that work? Do you also outsource does the responsibility stay with the partner, or would it stay with the marketplace, the merchant?
This almost sounds familiar to some of my payments day questions. Liability shift. Who has liability?
Yes.
That is actually a great question. I think it depends, right? At the end of the day, the marketplace is really on the hook to make sure the customer is whole. So when we think about it in payments terms, the marketplace is the merchant of record. And so, when there's a grievance between the buyer and ultimately the seller, the marketplace is the arbitrator. And to an extent, the seller is completely invisible. If you think about the burden in terms of the liability for a partner that's brought in for a marketplace, there's a variety of different angles here. If you have the right partner, let's say that one of the payment providers isn't ready because there's been a change in a market, specifically in Europe. There's been a lot of push to get strong customer authentication and 3D Secure out there. Not every provider was ready. When that mandate came out from the European Union, and so if you think about it. A partner that has multiple connections into different payment providers, really the liability is on them to make sure that that marketplace has the ability to transact payments. Now, again, at the end of the day, the marketplace is the merchant, and they held the account with the actual payment provider. But you are more or less pushing off the burden of ensuring that those updates are happening, that the APIs and the variety of APIs that connect into that platform, have been updated. And again, if you think about the general commerce system, I think the average number of apps that hang off of a commerce tool is 8 to 10. In a marketplace, that can be upwards of 15 or 20. And so and that's not the most sophisticated marketplaces. I've seen very large marketplaces that have 15 or 20 different payment service providers, and they require things like payment orchestration layer to make sure that they can route accordingly, to avoid cross-border transaction fees, to get best cost routing, those kinds of things, and trying to build all that yourself, maintain it, ensure compliance, and ensure security, really is overhead that organizations just shouldn't shoulder in today's day and age. I think in the 90s it kind of made sense to build your own CRM. Nowadays that just isn't even questioned. You just go out and get Salesforce.com or HubSpot or one of these other platforms.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And there's a there's a fourth component here that's not really listed. And I touched on it just a little bit, but it's so important. This know your vendor is really, really important stuff. When you're operating a marketplace and you're facilitating payments out to different vendors, you might have international suppliers, and you've got to make sure that you know who the ultimate beneficial owner is. You've got to know who that vendor is before you actually push a payment to them. And so, there's providers as well that can be bolted in to a marketplace platform like Secure, Alloy, Middesk, that can effectively assist you with the vetting of, your vendors and ensure that you can get them on as quick as possible so they can start selling and you can ultimately pay them, when they fulfill goods. Cool. I want to capstone with this because I know there's a lot of brands out there, and even sellers that are probably asking themselves, hey, do I participate in marketplace? Do I build a marketplace? What we've seen is organizations and brands that augment their core product with a marketplace, with complementary products and vendors and service providers, win. If you think about these organizations, these are companies that might have a marquee product that ultimately what they've done is they brought in additional organizations that really kind of build on top of it, and they're monetizing that ecosystem. I'll give you an example, right? Apple's done a great job of this. Not only do they have the developer, the App Store that effectively helps them monetize and democratize, developers building apps for their ecosystem. But, it's a great value add for the customer base. Part of the reason why you buy the phone and or, their hardware is because at the end of the day, that you've got this ecosystem of really high quality curated apps that support it. Not only apps, but also hardware, right? There's a ton of hardware that gets manufactured by third parties that are provided for that ecosystem. And again, that's just one example. I mean, there's hundreds of these where brands can actually bring in additional products to really augment and help increase the average order value on their storefront. And you can do that without actually, completely changing and blowing up your e-commerce environment. You can layer this in with the right platform that effectively allows you to bring these in. I was talking to a retailer recently at NRF that was looking at doing just this, right? They've got some marquee brands, they're multi brand organization. And what they want to do is they want to bring in complementary products that have been paired, with their clothing line. And this totally makes sense. They don't make shoes. They don't make hats. They don't make certain things, these accessories that just go well with their product line. And so, they're looking at expanding their ecosystem by layering that into their core commerce experience.
That's a really interesting point and a very important one, actually, in that this is going down. It's going down the becoming a marketplace can be an evolution. Right, you can evolve your business and your model from where it is today into becoming more of a marketplace. It's something that can happen over time, and being able to layer in the technology at the back end so that you can bring on, other brands to be able to sell directly on your platform. That's a really interesting point.
Absolutely, and this goes across industries, right? Not just retail. If we think about car manufacturers, I'll pick one in particular. If you think about Porsche, Porsche is a magnificent brand. They make beautiful cars. If they were to build a marketplace around that brand and bring in the vendors that provide third-party parts, like Brembo. Brembo makes amazing ceramic brakes. Porsche obviously offers ceramic brakes. But the funny thing is when someone buys Brembo brakes off some other website, Porsche makes absolutely nothing on that transaction. And as an enthusiast, I would absolutely buy from Porsche, some Brembo brakes because I trust them. They've curated it, and it's augmented experience for the buyer. And again, this is endless. I mean, we could talk of 10 or 12 other industries where this is the case. Awesome. Well,
fantastic.
Bobby,
Well, we do
I want to
have,
turn it over to
yeah,
the
listen,
audience.
stay where you are because I think we've got some questions. I'm just looking at them now. Right. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat box. So this is a bit of a, does Nautical work with other ERPs or do I have to move my existing systems into Nautical? I think you sort of touched on this earlier, didn't you, about layering in, but it's a good
Bobby,
question.
that is a fantastic question. What we like to say is, we allow folks to re-platform without re-platforming. And Nautical really, the way we built this is we built it in a way that allows organizations to stand up Nautical in parallel with their existing and synchronize, their catalog and augment their current experiences. So in reality, you don't have to with Nautical replace your core commerce system. If you want multi-vendor capability, Nautical can be behind the scenes, orchestrating the transactions, and what that does for organizations is it de-risks what would otherwise be a not only very risky and very expensive digital transformation, but it allows them to test, the model without significant risk.
Yeah. This next question has just come in, and it's my favorite question. I think whoever sent this in is amazing. I love it. Thank you very much. So, Ryan, how do I know when I'm ready to launch my own marketplace? I think that's a brilliant question.
No, it is, and it really touches home for me because when we think about marketplaces, there's what we call cold starts. Folks that have great ideas and they want to launch a marketplace. You've got to aggregate demand. That's really the job of a marketplace, right? And so if you already have a captive audience, whether you're an expert in a space or you've been doing something, and you know exactly how to do it, and you already have the network of either suppliers and buyers, that's when you're ready, right? To actually lean into a marketplace. I would also say, if you're doing commerce and you've hit, any level of success on GMV, multiple millions of dollars, there's an opportunity for you to start augmenting with multiple vendors in an asset-like way.
Yeah. Yeah. And also just to add to that, there's also some brands that have had to become a marketplace, the high street chains we've seen brands here in the UK, Debenhams, lots of high street chains, department stores that have shut down their models. Gap no longer has physical stores. They're all selling online. And those department stores are now marketplaces in effect. There's another good one here. It says, how will the marketplace model work in 5 years' time? How's it going to look? How do you see this changing? If you were to fast forward 5 years, what do you see as the trends?
That's a gret question. In my mind, I see marketplaces embedded in the fabric of commerce, right? And it becoming the new standard in commerce. You mentioned some marquee brands just a moment ago. If you think about it, there's a couple of key movements in society right now that are really, in my mind, moving the needle for retail. One of them is environmental and sustainable goods, right? This idea that re-commerce is rising is really a result of this, as well as people just wanting some of this vintage goods. And so you'd mentioned a couple brands, but I know Coach leaned into this recently. They started selling lightly used or reloved bags. And I love how they position that, right? The marketing around that is, yes, reloved. But a lot of brands are going to do this. You're going to see jean companies doing this. Vintage jeans are a thing. instead of buying them on things like Facebook Marketplace in a peer-to-peer way, the marquee jean brands, whether it's Lucky Brand or Wrangler or Lee's or pick your favorite brand. Getting these jeans that are lightly worn or in variety of state of condition, and allowing that brand to make money on that in a post-purchase monetization way is going to change the way marketplaces operate. And I think that's coming much faster than 5 years. I think in the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to see that. And there's just not enough time to blow up your current e-commerce system and say, okay, I want to start anew and layer in commerce or marketplace, right? You've got to embrace a system that more or less extends what you're currently doing without blowing up that customer experience.
Yeah. And I think what you said about marketplaces becoming entwined in the fabric of e-commerce is really important and really pertinent, because to the naked eye today, we know what we can, as a consumer, I know that's a marketplace, but more and more there are brands becoming marketplaces which are not obvious to us consumers. When we look at them, they still look the same, but they're actually operating as a marketplace model, and that's invisible. So I think it's far more prevalent than we think or that we see today. How does Nautical differ from what is offered in the market today? So, I mean, there must be other companies doing what you do in terms of being able to offer sort of like marketplaces that can be rebranded and whatever else. What makes it different?
Absolutely, great question. I think the biggest differentiation is the holistic perspective of what a marketplace has to do. I like to say Nautical operates more as like a marketplace ERP. We help organizations from vendor onboarding through the listing and presentment of services or goods, and to the order, the accounting, the settlement, the payout, all of that. And so, the biggest differentiator for us is modern platform built, really for the modern marketplace. And one of the key themes now that we're seeing in marketplaces, and this is an angle that a lot of organizations don't necessarily think is a marketplace, but really is social selling. Right?
Yes.
Affiliates and influencers are now the way, what I call, I like to say, we have Gen Xers, we have millennials, and then the next generation I'm calling digital natives. These digital natives, that's where they buy. They buy from folks that are on TikTok and Instagram that are saying, hey, look, this is what I use, this is why I use it, or they buy it because they see them wearing that, right? And so you've got to have a platform that embraces this influencer model and social selling model. And that needs to be weaved in the fabric of the system. This can't be an afterthought. It can't be an app. And I believe that's the biggest difference in Nautical is, we designed it in a way that it wasn't an afterthought. It really orchestrates the transaction end to end across all of the different, iterations of what a marketplace would look like.
So, Ryan, we had a really good question earlier, which was from someone that asked about how do I know when I'm ready, when my business is ready to consider taking steps towards becoming a marketplace. And you mentioned a few things there, but what are the typical barriers to entry for businesses that may be listening to this today and thinking, actually, that could be a good strategic step for us to consider?
Great question. I think the biggest barrier to entry is that organizations think this has to be a Herculean project. It really doesn't. What we like to tell customers is they really should look at this as a crawl, walk, run. You don't have to go from 0 to 100 day one or even in 3 years, right? It's an evolution. Marketplace really is a journey. If you look at even Amazon, right? Amazon started as a bookstore, right? And effectively created the largest bookstore on earth by effectively bringing in a bunch of distributors. And so you can almost consider it drop shipping. And then they realized, wow, we can start offering new products. And they eventually evolved into becoming this marketplace that powers multiple sellers. I would say organizations really should approach a marketplace with a crawl, walk, run approach. Start small. If your strength is, hey, I've got a marquee brand that could use influencers and social sellers, layer in influencers. That is marketplace, right? That is a component of marketplace. And if that's successful, then start augmenting the brand with new products. What we've heard from retailers is that when they do add marketplace to their existing catalog, their SKU of offerings increase by on average about 33%. That's pretty significant. Which then means the average order value and the average order size, the basket increases. So in my mind, it's really the approach. That is the biggest barrier to entry, because everybody thinks it's got to be super expensive and it's got to take forever. Again, crawl, walk, run, de-risk it.
Break it off. Break it up into manageable chunks. And you've already answered this question, but maybe you can add a bit more to it. So where do you start? I mean, in the example you just gave, you said if you have lots of influencers touting your brand, then social selling would be the logical point where you'd start. What advice would you give to a business that's thinking, okay, where should I start?
No, that's an incredible question. We always say that you've got to get to learning as fast as possible. And when we say learning, we mean selling your core product. So if your crawl phase takes more than 60 to 90 days, you've taken way too long to get off the ground, right? And so in my mind, what you want to do is you want to scope what I call that crawl phase, or the concept phase, as narrow as possible so you can get to the learnings as quick as possible. Where I would start is say, hey, I want to sell X, or I want to validate this hypothesis. I don't want to be too academic here, but let's say you want to augment the catalog with a couple of accessories, right? Add those accessories in and see if they actually sell, right? It doesn't have to be automated. There doesn't have to be AI. There doesn't have to be all this, supply chain automation to make all that happen. Those are the kinds of things that turn these projects into Herculean efforts that end up being 3-year endeavors. In your concept phase, you have to get to economic value as quick as possible, because that's where you learn, and then move to the next phase, right?
I think that's really, really, really good. I mean, it sounds, you don't have to overcomplicate it. Analysis is paralysis. So many things come into my head. I also think of my husband when you say put a nail in the wall and he brings out his whole DIY kit. Why do you have to complicate it? But I think that, the idea of becoming a marketplace sounds like such a Herculean, as you said earlier, Herculean effort, when actually it's not. And I think if there's the one most important thing to take away, that I'm going to take away from here, is that it doesn't need to be. And you can start small, and you just need to know which is the first step you take. So on that note, Ryan, if somebody wants to get in contact with you guys to talk about, explore this further, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, hit our website, connect with us on LinkedIn. Our team will definitely walk you through it. We're passionate about marketplaces. We're passionate about the challenges that people face when they do it. And our goal is helping you learn and get to economic value as quick as possible. That is ultimately what we want to do.
Fantastic.